Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. On a Sabbath, Jesus went to dine at the house of one of the leading Pharisees, and the people there were observing him carefully. He told a parable to those who had been invited, noticing how they were choosing the places of honor at the table. When you are invited by someone to a wedding banquet, do not recline at table in the place of honor. A more distinguished guest than you may have been invited by him, and the host who invited both of you may approach you and say, "Give your place to this man," and then you would proceed with embarrassment to take the lower place. Rather, when you are invited, go and take the lowest place, so that when the host comes to you, he may say, "My friend, move up to a higher position." Then you will enjoy the esteem of your companions at the table, for everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but the one who humbles himself will be exalted. Then he said to the host who invited him, "When you hold a lunch or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or your wealthy neighbors, in case they may invite you back and you have repayment. Rather, when you hold a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind. Blessed indeed will you be because of their inability to repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous." The Gospel of the Lord.
Let's go back about 100 years to the time of President Theodore Roosevelt, and it's said that when he hosted high-ranking guests, he was fond of taking them on evening walks on the grounds of the White House. And inevitably, he would point skyward and he'd say, looking up, he'd say, "Now that is the spiral galaxy of Andromeda. It's as large as our Milky Way. It is one of 100 million galaxies. It's 2,500,000 light years away. It consists of 100 billion suns, many larger than our own." And then after a brief silence, he would grin and say, "Now I think we're small enough. Let's go in and talk." Roosevelt, as he's portrayed here, I think was aware that in order for us to work together effectively, for truth to prevail, we need, don't we, a certain perspective regarding our position in the grand scheme of things. I think he realized, and trying to get us to realize, that self-importance and the lack of truthfulness militates against a healthy life. Now, I also ran across recently a humor web that suggested that we also can gain a healthy perspective not by gazing up at the stars, but by looking carefully at ourselves in the mirror. And this site says, at age 3, a girl looks at herself and sees a queen. At age 8, she looks and sees Cinderella or Sleeping Beauty. At 15, she sees herself as chubby or pimply or ugly or unable to go to school, looking like that. At 20, she's still too thin, too fat, too short, too tall, but she goes to class anyways. At 30, she still sees herself as at 30, she still sees herself as too fat or too thin, but she says, "I don't have time to fix it," so she goes out anyways. At 40, she sees all these problems and she says, "Well, at least I'm healthy and clean," and goes on again. At 50, she looks at herself and she says, well, that's me, and goes wherever she chooses. At 60, she looks at herself and she realizes, well, some people can't even see themselves in the mirror. So she goes out. At 70, she looks at herself and sees wisdom and laughter and ability and goes out with a grateful heart. At 80, she doesn't even bother to look. Yeah. She just puts on a purple hat and goes out to enjoy the companionship of others. Maybe we should grab that purple hat a little earlier in life. Now, women, I'm not picking on you. I'm not being a chauvinist. We men do the same thing in our own way. Humility, knowing ourselves. In our readings today, first reading in the gospel, they give us some insights on this from a little more profound depth, because it talks even about how we do this and why it's important. Each of those readings, if we think about, it was proclaimed, calls you and me to stand in truth before God and others, to see who we are, not the center, but at the same time, a little less than the angels. That's something, isn't it? Our perspective, and this is a purely Christian Catholic perspective, reminds me and you, I hope, to not be enamored of what I see or unhappy because of what I don't see, but to look beyond it to what's more important. Then we have a healthy life. And maybe most importantly, and this is, he's getting at the key of how do I do it, it's asking me to have a change of perspective, to look to the other first. He says, you want to know how to do this? Look to the other first. Be willing to die to that selfishness. Now, looking up at the stars, that probably helps. And looking into a mirror will probably eventually help. But it's the shift of perspective from me to you, and ultimately to the thou, who is God, that is most effective. It shows us our dignity of why I should live well, and yet I'm not the center. And in doing this, he's saying, how do I do that? He's saying to look outward rather than inward, to see you first and not me. And that's tough because, well, who's going to take care of me? And that's where faith comes in, that in doing this, somehow I gain a richer life. But in doing that, that's faith. That's Christianity. That's what it means to be a Catholic. And the practice of that is what he's asking you to do. Because when I try to practice this, the needs of others become an opportunity to elevate their status rather than my own. Putting ourselves in perspective. Valuing others above myself and my concerns affords them dignity as well as my own. Caring for those who cannot reciprocate, that perhaps, isn't it, is the ultimate test of humility, and that I have nothing to gain except the blessedness of giving. And I'll begin to look at my own identity, not in a mirror, but in their faces. To do this, it's hard. But I think, as I've said before so often, each week, Jesus gives us just a little way to how to really live faith. And humility is part of that, of knowing who we are, recognizing I'm not the center, and strangely enough, putting you first in each of our lives is what helps me to do this. God bless you.